Welcome, everyone. My name is Jon Scheele, and I am the founder of Blue Connector, which is a consulting company based out of Singapore. I'm also the organizer of the apiConnections meetup groups across India, Singapore, and Indonesia. And I'm also the organizer of API Days conferences in Singapore and in India. I'm delighted to have Bharat Merja here with us to discuss the how to secure APIs against security threats.
Hi, thanks everybody for joining us. This webinar will be recorded just for a housekeeping purpose. If you have any questions, use Q&A box. We will reply to your questions during the session and after session. This is about me. Myself, Bharat Merja. I am a senior solution engineer with F5 Networks. I have 24 years plus experience, and the rest of things I have just mentioned for your reference. For socially, you can connect me. Today's agenda is securing APIs, lessons from the breaches we have seen across, then security controls for the APIs and what regulatories are advising. Then post that we have some small demonstration of how you can secure the API with the 3 pillars for securing APIs, and followed by we will be having a Q&A. So securing API against cyber threats, that was on our agenda today. And if you see the digital transformations of the organization, most of organization today firmly in between to the second phase, where we see the digital expansions. The impact of digital expansion is actually based on the technology and IT, and app developers are actually trying to stitch together the disparate applications, systems, and services into a seamless digital experience. That is where the organization embraced APIs. And this is since how the API growth is. Because API can have a significant impact on the every industries, from banking or retail or gaming. Our research and subsequent model shows that there is exponential growth in APIs in past few years. Even greater growth we look in next 10 years. So there is it's a constant phenomenon. And if you see the way of the consumption of APIs, the trend is changing. Consider that like a typical enterprise and how they use this API. The API are today consumed on infrastructure services such as cloud, private or public, modern architectures, digital experience, or an automation. In automation, like a CI/CD deployment pipeline on APIs integrates with systems, device, and services. This is where it makes, as I earlier was talking about, stitching together the disparate applications or systems to make the digital experience in a real life. There are many more examples, not just limited to what I have mentioned. Okay, but even just few to say that how the API, because of that, API is rapidly growing. If data is today's new oil, then API is going to be a new plastic for it. Okay, responsibly, if you see, creation of the API, use of API, management of the API is now becoming a critical component. And if we see one example of the way APIs are getting consumed and how the misuse of the APIs or a fraud on API happens, this is a critical, becoming a more and more critical. So if an enterprise is using not API and if is not careful using how to use this API, many opportunity for fraud will happen. And this behavior is to actually challenges the implementation of API. Production and development teams may be having a deadline, and that's why somewhere some portion of the APIs which may have not been properly secure. And that is where the hackers and others are trying to misuse the API. Another example, if I would like to convey here, is webhooks also can be a weaponized, because webhooks are a asynchronous communication, and user-defined HTTP callback on a small snipper link to the web application. Once this webhook URL is exposed, the data model will be revealed, and any hacker can hack into the service and send a malformed data object asynchronously. This creates a challenge to an organization who have integrated with the such kind of API and exposures to the webhooks. So if you see the API breaches, it is happening constantly. And there are lots of millions of users' data is getting exposed, or sometimes vulnerabilities are getting exposed. So if we take an example like Uber. So Uber in September 2019 somewhere, the critical bug in a Uber API was found. And that Uber API endpoint was having a two vulnerability. One of them is what the Gartner, OAP's top 10, the first one, BOLA, broker object level authentication. So because of this, program did not validate that client who sent the request had access to the user represented by the user ID parameters. The client could access the data by changing its user ID. So there was a broken object level authorization. And the second was the challenge, which was also a part of the OWeb's top 10, is excessive data was exposed. So the client was required a very small amount of information, but the API was exposing more information. And that is where the that particular API, though it was vulnerability was itself was opened by the Uber and told to the public that this is having exposures, and then they have fixed it, but it was not misused at least. But I'm just giving an example how it can be an exploited if it is been well known before. So this is happening. Now if you see the breaches by a root cause, the access, this is an F5 lab report, and we have analyzed the multiple APIs breaches happening from 2006 to 2020. And these are the area where we have seen that the root cause of the breaches is happening. So the access is dominant for the breaches to happen. And the second one is an accidental. Accidental is more of a OWeb's top 10, if you correlate, is a more of towards the, you can say, misconfiguration of the your data. So if we further analysis does if breaches by sector, then the financial and insurance, healthcare and social, educational services, retail trades remains more on a target compared to the other enterprise. But if we see on how the vary by sector, it's clear targeting was that in 2019, it's seen that exploit constituted 87% of the breaches, which is happen on financials and together with the education services. So it's a huge amount, which is people are finding a reason to misuse the API. And if we see the, just a minute, breaches by sector with the cause, we can see that in a retail sector, approximately half of the percentage of the API misuse was on an accidental misconfiguration side. So it's a challenging. So sometimes some misconfiguration may cause lots of challenge to the API. Access breaches are not only limited to the one area, but it remains a constant factor. And it not.
So Bharat,
Yeah.
sorry, for some reason it flipped to the title slide at the moment. Okay, so you're looking at breaches now, right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just for the audience, there is a Q&A. Feel free to ask questions or in the Q&A section, and we will attend to them as Bharat goes through. Sorry, Bharat.
Yeah. Thank you. So I was talking on the sectors and the sector-wise distributions and where the having the higher misuse or breaches happen. If you see in a financial sector, the access remains a major portion. Health and care also access remains major portion. But in health and care, there is another major breaches happens is a third party's data loss. While financial sector 50% plus is actually access and web. So they try to reach on both the sides, on access of a broken authentication or a accidental misconfiguration of your data APIs. So API vulnerabilities are found and they're in across all the sectors. It is not only limited to the healthcare or social assistance and finance, but the technology service provider, entertainment, manufacturing, and many more. So if we do the further threat analysis of an API attacks, bad authentication, bad authorization, and misconfiguration actually put together itself is more than 2/3 of the API breaches we have seen in 2020 because of those reasons. This is the three area where we have seen the lots of breach happens. Recently for 2020 also we have API breach analysis as well as the application threats analysis report published. You can visit F5 Labs. If you see the categories of those attacks, OAP's API top 10, 2019 when it published, though they publish every 3 years, probably in 2022 we have the once again the categories of the attacks. But the broken object level authorization, broken authentication, access, data exposures are remain a key factor. And when I'm talking about the excessive data exposures, I just given you the one of the example of the Uber breach example, right? So looking forward to generic implementation, developer now tends to expose all objects properties without considering their individual sensitivity. That creates a challenge to the excessive data exposures. So relying on a client to perform data filtering rather than they do on the application side. And this is where the unwanted data sometimes goes on a wrong hand. And on a authentication mechanisms are often implemented incorrectly. This allows the attacker to compromise the authentication token or to exploit the implementation flows and assume the user's identity, which can be temporarily or permanently, they can continue the exercise. So this is required more focus. That obviously the injection is also not same, which is on a web application, you can see the same having a correlation here. But how attackers trumps over this API? This is, once again, we have analyzed the around 700 plus 700 to 800 of our customer base. And then we analyze with respect to on a OF's top 10, how they have seen the breaches in their organization. And if you see the broken authentication and security misconfiguration itself remains 40%, 35 to 40% of the challenge they have faced. So obviously, the authentication and authorization, that is, when I talk authentication is like your IDP, identity providers, and authorization, this is what identity provider, who are you? And authorization is declaring that whether you have the access to this or not. Should I grant you to have access to it? Okay, so in this area, this is actually becoming a mess. And stolen API keys, unauthenticated internal API, and sometimes OAuth is not implemented, or a OAuth is implemented, but your many times on a single page application, your client secret and client IDs are well known to the users in a browsers, and from the men in the browsers can try to steal this information and can use the authentication auth code together to get an access token. So those are definitely a challenge remains, because specifically on a mobile app, which having less control compared to what the browser level we do have. So in a critical control for API, then it is really a need of considering that we have to protect internal APIs, we have to rotate APIs keys, we have to protect against the malicious activity, we have to protect against the fraud preventions, and obviously on a traffic management, how we can do the better routing and together. This was a guideline by the RBI for digital payment security control, and few guideline points I just tried to highlight, but this is also once again authentication framework, fraud risk management, internet banking security controls. Those are the key points where the RBI, this document is in a public, and they tried to explain how you put a control. And if we deeply analyze those points, the more or less it tells the same context which is OF's top 10 have seen happening. And I just put these points to consider that when you are thinking of on a correlate with your API infrastructure versus what the guideline states. So let us say evaluate how we can do a better API defense. So when we do or willing to do the better API defense, obviously there are key points which need to be I say top 10 recommendations, or how we can make sure that your API or API infrastructure remains more and more secure. One thing is treat equally, means secure API equally. It does not mean that the access data should be exposed at later stage. So every portion or a security which is applied should be across the API infrastructure same. And we know that because of the API sprawl, there is a lots of API is constantly grows, and consumption is also growing. It's better to protect internal API also. It is necessary to rotate API keys, use the proper mechanism of OAuth or OIDC, then mandate the JWT signing together, provide the single source of truth, and enable API to API connectivity with the security. When I say API to API connectivity with the security, it means the east-west traffic also should have the validated across the APIs. So, and definitely provide trust as a metric. Okay, so after all of this is obviously need to be along with the validated payloads and use the web application firewall. So in a nutshell, API is obviously having the three contexts. One of them, which I would like to convey, is on a security side point of view. If you see, one of them is network layer security. Second is access level security. Third one is a authorization level security. So this will help in together to achieve the complete API point of view. John, I will take a pause here.
Yeah. So we have another poll that we'd like to ask. Which architectural styles do you currently have for your APIs? I'd expect quite a few REST, perhaps a few SOAP. Okay, let's have a look at these results. I guess I'm not very surprised at this. Very strongly in the REST camp, and some SOAP probably from some time ago, or for particular applications that require
it. Thanks for showing the interest in the poll. So it's obviously the REST is, once again, it is depicting to me. Just a minute, let me close it.
I think you can just close it.
Yeah.
Because I have closed it on. I have stopped the poll.
Yeah. So F5 NGINX solution for API is supporting the REST APIs and GraphQL. So I think most of your consumption is in that area only, and that's in line. So API are actually today require a new look to, or a new strategy to how we can make sure that API remains secure. There are, as I was stating, there is three pillars where you can take care of the API, and you tries to one of them is how you can maintain your more and more secure your API with the versioning of the APIs and enroll the particular APIs using a common mechanism. And when you are putting your baseline security in front, obviously, sorry. Just give me a minute. Baseline API security, when I'm talking, is first thing is the access. So authentication and authorization. And then second level of baseline security is how you can make sure the network level attacks should not happen to your APIs. So rate limiting, or a allow list, or a whitelist, blacklist, or any thresholding, or a consumption of API based on the quota. This is where you protect your API using the NGINX as an API gateway. Then the third point, which is on an advanced security point, or when I talks about the signatures or a vulnerability inspection. So on a top of NGINX Plus, we have App Protect, which helps the fraud preventions or a defense against the DOS and bots, and protection against the vulnerability, so signature-based inspection. And obviously on top of that, schema validation. So schema validation helps you to use your API definition, which is you would have published and onboarded using the management tool or a versioning. Same API definition you force on the app protect and make sure that only the API call which happens is as per the schema you have defined. If there is a deviation in the schema, then NGINX app protect will stop it there itself. So it protects those API call never goes to your API endpoint. It stops at your API gateway level itself. So with this, actually, I will just do a small demonstration how you can achieve NGINX using an NGINX, the three pillars of the security. One is the using NGINX controller, you can do the API versioning, management, monitoring, and using the API gateway, how you can make the auth engine, that is authentication and authorization plus rate limiting. And lastly, on using NGINX app protect, the schema validations and any kind of vulnerability exposure check. So all three level I would like to demonstrate. Okay, so let me just first demonstrate the NGINX controller. That this is the dashboard of our NGINX controller. So NGINX controller is actually helps you to provide the complete analytics of the NGINX deployment. Just on a brief on that side, controller is actually a separate control plane. So normally on the API management solutions or API gateway solution, normally control plane and data plane remains together, but with NGINX we have separate. In NGINX controller will only do the API management, analytics, and service onboarding job or publishing of APIs. While the API gateway is NGINX plus instances, and that will do the delivery of your APIs. So the data plane remains completely separate, and any loss on a control plane or data plane does not affect to each other. So it remains completely separate. So let me just show you the one of the APIs, which is I have two versions of APIs. So you can control your versioning, you can publish your versioning on a single gateway with the multiple of your version together. And onboarding is bit easy. So if we I just take you to the if you think to an add and publish API, you give a name, and then it's bit simple. So where you want to do the API deployment, and then you just do the routing, and then simple it will be published there. So with respect to the API version which you would have published, you have a control. So the configuration is bit easy. Deployment is where I have my environment in which I am going to select which particular app which I have deployed, and then on top of that I can if I have another gateway, I can use that, or wherever I want to publish, I can publish that particular APIs. And let routing. So this is the key component where you define that which particular application which will manage my API. So API request or API URI context will lead you to the specific component, a specific microservices. So like I have a node port service running on 31002, 31001, and 31100. So adjective, animals, and colors. So on a colors, I have applied the authentication, authorization, that is the make an access control visible. And the second thing which I have applied here is the rate limiting. So make sure that the consumption will not happens abruptly from the single users. And obviously, authentication is for authentication purpose, and conditional access is for authorization purpose. And then I have done the web on top of it, which will make sure that whenever I'm targeting then API, it will be validated and against the schema. And the second point is it will be checked against the signature. So misuse of if the API call should not happen. If we go in a depth of configuration, you can see that I have conditional access, and in the conditional access, I am going to see the JWT claim. If the user is part of the having attribute, which is a groups and its value is employee, then only he or she can have the access to the my API. With respect to the policies and the configuration, you can see here, this is my JSON file for my definition of the security policy. In that, I have just searched a link. So if I do not do that, it will be just like a bigger file. So for the demonstrations, whatever violation I need to check, illegal gRPC methods, everything is there. You can tune it your policy accordingly. But why I am trying to showcase here is you can have your API definition anywhere. If your NGINX API gateway have the access to the net, it will download your API definitions, open API definition file, Swagger file, and it is for the schema validation purpose. Then on a configuration, I have enabled the app protect, and I have used this particular policy file, which I was just showcasing. So it will just go and check the validation of the schema together, and whatever the violations and I have enabled, disable, accordingly it will apply the policy. And you can send the syslog server across to the syslog server or wherever you want. Okay, so this is the basic of the configuration. Let me just demonstrate you to how the consumption happens. Okay, so this is my Postman, and I just clear my cookies, and let me just get a new token. I am using the open clock. So this is for the OIDC. And if I try to get a new token and this user actually not a part of the groups, it does not have a groups attributes. So when I say proceed and I will use his token, and if we send the request, you can see 403 forbidden. So if you once again I will come back, you can see that if the particular user is not a part of employee, the failure response should be a 403. Now let me just use the user who is having the our groups as an attribute with the value as employee. So I'll just delete the was token, and I will use the match token now. And when we try to access, yeah, it's successful. Now this is applies. Now if you see the rate limiting parameter, so if I have make five requests per minute, so you have a choice per second or a minute. So it means that the MET can do the request. Every 12 seconds, he can make a request. So totally, he can do the 5 requests in a minute. It does not mean that within the first 5, he can make the 5 requests, and 55 seconds, he can't make a request. So every 12 seconds, he can consume it. So if he tries to again and again, and in this case, he will get the too many requests. So he will be controlled. He will not be able to consume it a lot. The second portion is using of a WAF. This is typically how it gets consumed. Now, once you enable the WAF, let me, I think, if you see here, I have tried to make a cross-site script attack on a particular API call. So I'm going to call on a v3 and location with the additional data which is matching with the is an unharmful cross-site scripting attack. And you can see that the WAF had stopped the users. So bit easy, and this particular attacks also will be reported on inside also, and it can be reported to the I have another tool which is running as a ELK. Probably if it is, I have to start from the post. So it's a log can be exported. So that's all from my side for the demonstration point of view. We have any question and answer, we will be happy to answer that.
I guess I have a question, Bharat, because what we saw about the most common security problems with APIs was the broken authentication. Yeah. And I guess when an organization has a lot of APIs from a lot of different systems, that it can be a challenge to enforce a common policy across all of those. But the point, I think, is that by centralizing the entry point to the APIs, you can apply the authentication at the gateway. Is that the key point?
Yeah, that's a key point. So when authentication and authorization, if when I say API sprawl, so what happens is more and more APIs are getting consumed across. That could be one of the example I was saying. When I'm using automation, we are consuming APIs. When I say I'm doing deployment of the microservices, I'm using API. I'm managing my cloud, I'm using an API. So the thing is, the consumption of API is growing, and because of this is growing, if you tries to make more control on an API endpoint, then those things need to be rolled out across. And this is where the misconfiguration happens. And sometimes the exposure of APIs or a validation of APIs are actually has been garlanded to the API endpoint, and API endpoints are actually is a purpose to provide the right response rather than do the security conjunction. So this is where the API gateway plays a role. So API gateway becomes a point where your north-south or east-west traffic travels between the applications or between the microservices. It applies the authentication and authorization. So the broken authentications or a access data exposures or a misconfigurations, whatever has been left at the API endpoint will be covered by the API gateway.
Mm-hmm. And so the actual process of reining in these different levels of different systems that have broken authentication, is that what are the steps towards gradually bringing those in? You establish what the gateway first, and then progressively migrate the authentication to from the different systems to make sure that they go through the gateway.
Yeah. So obviously, API gateway is not an intrusions or an intruder. API gateway is actually going to be the routing or doing the job of what mechanisms via which particular API placed in which namespace or which API is need to be diverted to the which application hosted into which John or DMG or wherever. But at the same time, when you are having something which is authentication purpose already deployed on a API endpoint, you just configure on an API gateway, and API gateway will use the same way. But the thing is, once you use this here, the better advantage is the new application or a new version you are enrolling of the API, you can consume the same pattern there. So once you move to the central point where you are controlling, from that point, rolling out to the other application will be a bit easy.
So you gain greater consistency over time, and then once everyone in the organization has seen how they can address the security problems and establish a more consistent pattern for authentication, then you start to pick up the laggards, I guess, who can see that is now the path of least resistance to actually address, rather than trying to patch or fix the authentication on systems individually.
Also, I would like to highlight on that probably the audience may have explored or may be exploring OAuth 2.1, which is PKCE. In this, which is making the API call as a financial grade APIs. Okay. So just for saying on a knowledge point of view, what it does is helps is when normally happens is when the single page application trying to or sometimes what happens is either a single page application or sometimes you have your mobile application. So mobile application actually use the browser for getting an access token, because app may not be having a proper facilities or infrastructures or insight to behave as the way the browser can do, right? So the browser gets a token, access tokens, and pass to the mobile application. In between, intruder can have the access to the auth code, and that auth code and the client secret, which is maybe lying on inside of the application, or a client ID lying inside of the application, they consume it and tries to get an access token on behalf of the actual application. So once you have the auth code and client secret, actually the OIDC infrastructure does not go beyond that and to check beyond that, because it just issues the access token. Now access token is consumable by anybody. What the PKCE in advancedly does is, along with the when issuing the auth code, it gives the code challenge and code verification. So code verification and code challenge is just like we have private key, public key, right? So the code verifier, it will keep at the who is going to verify the access token, and when he pass the particular code challenge, the application browser do consume it and then provide the access token. So in between, the intruder does not have the access to and that is frequently gets changed. So intruder can consume that, yeah.
And I guess that points to the future proofing of the authentication, because you just mentioned PKCE, which is a relatively new form of authentication, and it probably won't be the last form. So if you have systems that are using old forms of authentication that were considered best practice in their day, but are now quite vulnerable, well, migrating to a newer standard like PKCE is easier when you have centralized behind the gateway and let the gateway manage that. That upgrade.
That's a really good input, John. Why? Because I'm saying is it's not a PKC adoption of PKCs, but along with that, it should be like when you are choosing a API gateway or API gateway infrastructure, that also should be compatible for the PKCE. Because tomorrow, if you try to roll it out in a financial grade API, probably probably API gateway should be ready for that.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. I think there's a slide that we have on where people can go to learn more. Is that in your deck?
Yeah, I'm having that. I just said that again. Thank you, slide, and you have the QR code. You can scan and you just apply for an NGINX controller license, which will provide you the controller along with the use.
Okay, and so that could be installed on any environment. Typically, what a Linux environment is it on?
Okay, it's required a Linux-based OS, and it's having some supported operating system versions, which is well described that when you get the license, it's having a relative document link and user. So CentOS and RHEL and Ubuntu is those are supported OS.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks very much, Bharat, for walking through those considerations and also the challenges, but also a solution for addressing it. And it's about practices, really centralizing through a gateway, and making your security more future-proof. We're going to share the recording of this presentation so you can go back to it, and also we're shaping up for the API Days India conference on the 11th and 12th of May. We're looking forward to lots of people sharing and learning more about APIs and both the business and the technology side of APIs.